في أكبر الكتب.
Welcome back, everyone. Integrating Real Perspective here. And today's review, I specifically partially wanted to do a review for my friend Jason, who is a fellow cinephile and someone who has been a great teacher for me in, rediscovering my own artistry as a musician. Um, I wanted to do a review of a film that he got me into recently called Dangerous Liaisons, which is a Stephen Frears movie from 1988. And I did review Stephen Frears's movie High Fidelity early in the first quarter of 2024. But um, then I also happened upon this somewhat obscure teen romance drama from 1999 called Cruel Intentions, which I had just discovered by random happenstance on Amazon Prime. And the premise I had wanted to start off with was to originally do a double feature review of both these movies and their timeless themes of power, seduction, social class, and conflicts of status quo, and the search for real love, which would have initially made sense since both Dangerous Liaisons and Cruel Intentions are based on the same French novel, Les Liaisons Dangereuses. Dangerous. But sorry, my French is a bit botched here. By Pierre Choderos de Laclos. And while I do love Stephen Frears' faithful adaptation, on-screen retelling of that novel that set up a recreation of the pre-French Revolution period, the 20th century setting of Manhattan, New York, and Cruel Intentions seemed like a better, more contemporary location. And, this was set in 1999. And I was 13 years old at the time. Plus, I remember when the first trailer of this film dropped, and I had at least some familiarity with it, which, still echoes to the present day compared to Dangerous Liaisons. And so, while watching this film, currently in the month of July, um, when I had just binge watched the late 90s I Know What You Did Last Summer movies, the 1997 I Know What You Did and the 1998 I Still Know What You Did Last Summer sequel, plus the recent Legacy sequel that came out this month, bearing the same title as the 1997 film. It just seemed classy to review a movie that had also recast Ryan Felipe and Sarah Michelle Gellar again, who had played originally in the 1997 I Know What You Did Last Summer movie. Except that while in that movie, they played the stereotypical, trashy, irresponsible post-high school graduates who then get into trouble when a villain in a slicker jacket with a hook for a hand, well, who carries around a hook on his hand. Um, you know, Here in Dangerous Liaisons, the two stars play an incestuous stepbrother stepsister pair who play these power games as a contest to see how they can each outdo each other in their sexual conquests. And so that's why I thought it would have been too redundant to make an overly expansive review comparing both the 1988 and 1999 movies. So I'm merely going to be dropping in highlights of the 1988 movie in here just to make comparisons between the two periods and the similarities of story and character elements. Because, honestly, when I first saw Dangerous Liaisons, for its time, the dialogue seemed very, very contemporary. It was pretty obvious that you could restage that whole film in a modern setting. And to my surprise, honestly, coming across Cruel Intentions happened at a time when I was already watching quite a bit of Sarah Michelle Gellar's work, with like Buffy the Vampire Slayer. And so, coming across this particular film that she was in, it just surprised me too that this was also adapted from the same French novel of Dangerous Liaisons. So this way, by specifically reviewing this movie, um, from 1999, Cruel Intentions, it'll cut down on any possible redundancies that may otherwise make this review longer and tedious. Like, okay, for starters, Ryan Felipe plays John Malkovich's part. They both even share the same last name, Valmont. It's just different first names. Malkovich is Vicomte de Valmont, and Ryan Felipe's character is Sebastian Valmont. And then Sarah Michelle Gellar's Catherine Mertuel reflects Glenn Close's Marquis de Mertuel. And you even have one point in the movie where Sebastian says that he plans to stay in Paris for a while. But even the luscious condo apartments in Manhattan take on a very French bourgeois aesthetic that is very, very lush. Now, director Ryan Cumble, who directed Cruel Intentions, says on the Blu-ray BTS interview that all this beautiful artifice is there to conceal the dark manipulative schemes going on between these two characters and the insidious unraveling that becomes their downfall. For different reasons. And you'll see how tragic it gets, later on. So Sebastian's story starts out as him being a womanizer who is last seen having a casual fling with the daughter of his therapist, played by, surprise, surprise, another Dangerous Liaison star, Swoozie Kurtz. And the daughter is played by Tara Reid, who has just a pretty minor cameo, but a very impactful cameo, playing the daughter of Sebastian's therapist. And the whole time she's in tears. And just goes to show that this is a very different Tara Reid than the one that you saw in American Pie, the one that was like, I'm coming. Anyways, we're introduced then to the stepsister, Catherine, that's Sarah Michelle Gellar's role, who carries cocaine inside her rosary necklace. How very devout of a Catholic she is. I mean, she plays the rich bitch who plays to Sebastian's charming charisma by setting up bets to get two different girls laid. And by doing this, an exchange will be made in which she gets Sebastian's vintage Jaguar and he gets to have sex with his stepsister. So, yes, there is an incestuous undercurrent going on between these two. Kind of a disturbing one based on a power play similar to Teo and Elizabeth. Teo and Isabel in the 2003 French erotica, The Dreamers. except that Cruel Intentions leaves out the explicit nudity and the graphic sex, instead focusing on making the dialogue all raunchy and full of teasing. So the two girls which are set up to be the focus of Sebastian's game of seduction are Cecil Caldwell, played by Selma Blair of Hellboy fame, and Annette Hargrave, played by Reese Witherspoon. But there are different strategies and parlor tricks being choreographed by Catherine tailored to the rules of the game she stages. Catherine is even using Cecil's cello teacher, Ronald, played by Sean Patrick Harris, as a pawn in her game, and a little bit of a boy toy, as you'll see later on. I very much enjoyed watching Sebastian's journey towards unraveling his true humanity and showing how hurt and vulnerable he really is deep down, knowing that he really wants to love authentically and not just try to be a stud because of the peer pressure to maintain a rich bourgeois, status, which is why, he's basically a simp for his stepsister Catherine. It's yeah, really interesting and just looking past the beautiful trappings and decor of the life that he lives. And the two girls he courts are very different in their behavior as well. Like Cecil comes off as seductive and without boundaries, despite, taking cello lessons from this very, very elegant black teacher. But, you look at her introductory scene and she's sitting, like with a little bit of restless leg syndrome, like crossing and uncrossing her legs, and often, teasing her, the fact that, uh, you know, like, I don't know if she was wearing panties or not, but she was definitely, acting kind of like Sharon Stone Basic Instinct like in that scene, displaying some exhibitionism behavior by, just barely covering her panties underneath. Annette, by contrast, is more demure, almost nun-like, always talking about saving herself for marriage and all that. And she's the one that actually gets Sebastian's attention the most, and is the one who ends up having the most psychological impact that ultimately changes Sebastian and, causes him to become more introspective and more analytical of his own inner world and his own values. In fact, Sebastian keeps a very detailed journal with pictures of the two girls, plus one of Catherine, to create essentially this chronicle, a scrapbook of sorts containing notes regarding the bet that he had going on with Catherine, and um, basically all the details behind how he would go about seducing Cecile and Annette. It's this journal that apparently becomes the infamous heirloom that has become a centerpiece of discussion on many social media blogs, particularly on Reddit. This journal, however, ends up having a mercurial essence to it, as it later on becomes a weapon that is used against Catherine, since it basically exposes and dredges up a lot of dirt on how wicked she is. Um, and this happens over time as Sebastian gradually starts developing feelings for Annette. It's a, you know, it starts out as being an agenda that Sebastian uses in the hopes that he's gonna get something from his stepsister, which is obviously sex, as if he doesn't have enough of it already with all of his courtship conquests. But then it later becomes one that shows, how Catherine was pulling all the strings behind the curtain, how essentially Sebastian was her simp. But all this happens not before Catherine starts turning against Sebastian at the point when he decides that, the bet is off. Um, and as I said earlier, Catherine is also found to be sleeping with Ronald. Sebastian happens to walk in while that's happening, and Ronald is just cleverly hiding underneath the bed. There's like this little slide out bed platform that exists underneath the main bed. And so, being that Cecil's cello teacher is also Catherine's boy toy, he eventually becomes her personal hitman as Catherine starts to make up a story about Sebastian hitting her. And this sends Ronald into such a, frothing rage that eventually he begins to hunt down Sebastian. And they start having a fist fight. Well, I mean, he starts throwing his fists at Sebastian in the midst of a busy street. And it happens that Annette so happens to be there. She steps in to try to break up the fight, but then Sebastian pushes her out of the way before a car hits her, only to then get struck by the car himself. Which is rather ironic because the car in I Know What You Did Last Summer ran over Ryan Philippe's character in that movie with much greater force of impact. And he goes crashing through this debris of this fishing port station and is lying all bloodied on the ground, but he's still alive. And yet, here in Cruel Intentions, he gets hit by a car just as the car is also hitting the brakes. And he rolls up over the top side of the car, falls off the back, breaking the windshield very slightly. And now he's lying, bleeding while dazed on the pavement, staring up into Annette's eyes as she comes over to his side to hold vigil over him as he lies dying. But this gradually does lead to the really, really sweet revenge scene that becomes the climax to the film, where Catherine is reading the eulogy for her now deceased stepbrother, trying to come off as sincere and all, until, one girl starts coming in and coming down the aisle of the pews and, starts um, whispering in people's ears, and you're wondering what's going on. Catherine is obviously starting to, stumble over her own words and is like, does anybody have any respect? So then she's led outside, which is where Cecil, as it turns out, is handing out a published version of the journal, which has now been titled posthumously Cruel Intentions. Yes, the title of this movie is also the title of Sebastian's journal. There's a very intriguing article on thethings.com that discusses the details of the journal, like the things that Sebastian writes on the pages, or even like cuts out little pieces of magazine sentences in different types of typeface font and pastes them inside the book, kind of like a creative writing project. So words like a person solely observing her and having seen the damage she's done to so many lives would most likely classify her as evil. He called Catherine brilliant because she has fooled everyone in her life except Sebastian. He also admits that the two are similar, but unlike Catherine, he has a heart. On the topic of Annette, Sebastian's original journal entries reveal that he thought of his future love as a blatantly photogenic and equally as blatantly repressed individual. Further, Sebastian calls Cecil empty, stupid, and calls the way that she talks insipid and babbling. Yeah, which is interesting, considering that Cecil is kind of a very weird mix of being really trashy, but also trying to be uh prudish too. I mean, there's like one point where, you know, Sebastian's telling her, you could look like a model, and then tries to get her to, pose all sexy and then like another scene some minutes later, you see that now she's like really getting all randy with Sebastian and trying to have sex with him, and he pushes her off the bed, but she tries teasing him to try to come back for more, saying things like, would you like a blow job? And just trying to come off as like some faux porn star, but in just the most awkward way imaginable. Wow. And this was Hellboy's girlfriend, the same actress. My goodness. Okay, so even the introductory scene where Sebastian is introduced to Cecil, it's during the scene where Catherine is talking to both Cecil, and it happens that Cecil's mom, unusually enough, her name is Bunny. Must be a Big Lebowski reference right there. Bunny Caldwell, and she's played by Christine Baranski, who I know I've seen in some films before. So so Catherine is talking about, how like Manchester boys are usually the most elegant and the most well disciplined, but there are some of the occasional bad apples. And pretty soon, Sebastian starts waltzing in and is introduced to Cecil and proceeds, to ask these very, very forward questions while still trying to dress him up in a silk suit to appear less frank, like complimenting Cecil on her shirt, which has that panda on it. And Cecil responds, "Oh, thanks. My dad got it for me when we were on a trip down in Madagascar," and something. And Sebastian responds back with a question, how are things down under? um, to imply that she's showing off her underwear underneath rather than, crossing her legs. Ah, yeah. Yeah, how are things down under? Yeah, I guess just goes to show, maybe there's some latent Australian ethnicity in Cecil's character that you know, brings out more of the horny, dirty side to her that Sebastian eventually brings out. I mean, even, Cecil, when she leaves with her mom, she tells Sebastian, "It was nice to meet you. Mwah! Ciao," is Sebastian's response. Very witty. Quite the ladies' man. I really, really loved how during the climax scene, though, when you finally see Annette driving away in the car, um, and leaving the city, basically, being seen now as this distant avenger for Sebastian, who is now finally, you know, torn down his stepsister, and finally has left her stewing in her own juices, crying, and even I think it's the pastor of the church come, or it might be her father. I can't remember who the guy was, but he comes by, takes the rosary off of her, opens it up, and you know, it's pretty clear that he now knows that she's been stashing cocaine inside of her rosary. Oh my gosh, yeah, it's just like talk about the ultimate burn. Henceforth, the reason why um when I watched the clip of the ending sequence on YouTube, I noticed that some of the comments on there were pointing out this is like the ultimate burn book, as if this set the trend for like what a show like That 70s Show would do when characters like Casey Kelso would say burn, so it's like the original burn started with the journal titled Cruel Intentions that was published. And oh boy, the song Bittersweet Symphony by The Verve it fits just perfectly here. It's it's it ends the film on a really like partly melancholic, but also like part black comedy in a way too. It's got a certain snarkiness to it while also, trying to be dramatic in a Shakespearean sort of way. Since, after all, yeah, being that this is like a 1999 version of Dangerous Liaisons. Yeah. Oh yeah, by the way, the soundtrack to this film is very stellar too. There's actually a song that's played at one point that features Elizabeth Fraser from the Cocteau Twins on it at one point. It's not a Cocteau Twins song, but it is a song that features Elizabeth Fraser on it. So yeah, that wraps up my review on Cruel Intentions. It's a tasteful teen drama movie that has all the trappings of a high school drama without really having it take place at high school. Now, hopefully you can see the similarities between Dangerous Liaisons and this movie. One thing that I should have added about Ronald earlier is that he is a modern recreation of Keanu Reeves's character, Le Chevalier d'Arcenay, and that Selma Blair is a modern recreation of Uma Thurman's character, Cecil. So you have a climactic sword battle to the death between Malkovich and Reeves in Dangerous Liaisons, which basically is reflected then in a modern day sense as a direct parallel regarding the fist fight scene between Ryan Philippe and Sean Patrick Harris in Cruel Intentions. So just as also Glenn Close's character, Marquise de Mertoul, has her royal position come crashing down by a letter publicized posthumously by Valmont, so it also goes that Catherine's reputation comes crashing down after Sebastian's journal is published. Both of these movies show how, there is an invisible attractor field that occurs in the space where romantic or sexual relationships begin, and that such power in that magnetic field can be dangerous. It doesn't matter how beautiful or how rich you are, or whether you have elegant taste in clothes or interior designing of your house. It's how you hold that power and use it either for manipulating others or for raising your vibration and using love as a premonition for a higher mission towards a more fulfilling, abundant life. Or to quote one of my favorite Deftones albums, Koino Yokan, which is what you see with Reese Witherspoon driving gallantly away from Manhattan at the end of Cruel Intentions and towards a better future, while maintaining a memorial for Sebastian in her mind, thinking back to all the wonderful memories that they had together, grateful for all that she ever learned about true love from him. Yeah, Cruel Intentions is highly rewatchable, and you have a colorful and sexy cast to look at as well. And that lush soundtrack featuring Fatboy Slim, Blur, Amy Mann, and Craig Armstrong is to die for. In fact, that Elizabeth Fraser song that I was referring to earlier was actually the song This Love, written by Craig Armstrong, featuring the Cocteau Twins, former Cocteau Twins singer, as a guest singer. So definitely take 97 minutes out of your day. It's not a huge investment of your time to watch this gift wrap packaged teen romance drama from the late 90s. And leave your admirable comments below on what your thoughts were. Chances are this is the type of movie that's going to inspire you to want to write, and journal a lot about your own philosophies and poetic graces as far as all your different encounters of love and relationships in your life. It's definitely a movie that makes you philosophize over those invisible forces that occur in relationships, those, interplays between men and women. So, yeah, with that being said, um, integrating real perspective here. And another stellar review with the movie Cruel Intentions from 1999. So I'll see you once more on the flip side of the reel, and ciao.